Picture this. The year is 1639. Off the storm-racked coast of England, the sea heaves like a beast, and there, anchored helplessly in the Downs, is a Spanish armada, 77 ships strong, groaning with treasure from the New World. Their decks glint with silver, their banners with the cross of Burgundy. From the fog comes death itself, the Dutch fleet, sleek, disciplined, and led by Admiral Maarten Tromp, a man who made the ocean his battlefield and the wind his ally. Cannon fire cracks the dawn, the thunder of broadsides rolls across the channel. Spanish galleons, once symbols of empire, shatter like glass beneath Dutch iron. Hours later, the sea burns orange. Powder magazines detonate, men scream, and as the smoke clears, Spain's last hope of mastering the waves sinks beneath the tide. This wasn't just a battle. It was an execution, the death knell of imperial dominance, and the crescendo of a rebellion that refused to die. The 80 Years' War, 1568 to 1648, began as a desperate act of defiance. Protestant provinces rising against the Catholic might of Philip II of Spain, a king who ruled with the Inquisition in one hand and the sword in the other. He taxed them to exhaustion, silenced their faith, and stationed his tercios like iron shackles across the Low Countries. But the Netherlands was no ordinary land. It was a nation wrestled from the sea, where windmills turned rebellion into survival. From the iconoclast riots of 1566 to the massacre at Antwerp, from William the Silent's assassins to Maurice of Nassau's military genius, the Dutch transformed from merchants to warriors, rebels to republicans. They drained their swamps for fields, and their fear for firepower. By the war's twilight, this wasn't just a revolt, it was a revolution in every sense. Spain bled itself dry, its soldiers mutinied, its empire strained. The Dutch, fueled by faith and trade, built fleets that ruled the seas, defended by captains like Tromp and Reuter, who fought not for kings, but for liberty, profit, and pride. Out of blood and brine rose the Dutch Republic, a powerhouse of commerce, art, and intellect. Rembrandt's brush, Spinoza's mind, and fleets that circled the globe. This is the story of how a people who refused to drown turned rebellion into renaissance and oppression into empire. So, buckle up, because we're diving into the final, ferocious chapter of the Dutch Revolt, where the fate of nations was decided not by crowns, but by courage on open water.
Part 1. The Truce Shatters, Resumption and Spanish Fury, 1621 to 1625. The 12 years' truce of 1609 had been nothing more than a breathing spell, a fragile pause in a war too bitter to end. For Spain, it was humiliation wrapped in paperwork. For the Dutch, it was prosperity. Fleets swelled, trade boomed, and Amsterdam glittered with silver once stolen from Spanish convoys. By 1621, the ink had dried, the patience had snapped, and Philip IV, young, proud, and dangerously ambitious, decided the rebels had grown too rich, too bold, too free. His right-hand man, the calculating Count Duke of Olivares, whispered a single promise: "The heretics will kneel again." Spain's first hammer blow came from its most formidable soldier, Ambrogio Spinola, the Genoese aristocrat turned imperial general, whose brilliance on the battlefield was matched only by the ruin it brought his own fortune. He marched north with 18,000 hardened tercios, Europe's finest killing machine, pikes and muskets gleaming under banners of crimson and gold. Their target was Breda, a jewel in the Dutch defenses and home to the Nassau legacy itself. The siege began in 1624, and it was a monster, a slow, grinding death. Spinola's men dug miles of trenches, strangling the city until famine and fever did the rest. Inside, 7,000 defenders held on through frost, rot, and hallucinations. Every horse eaten, every boot boiled for soup. Prince Maurice of Nassau, son of the martyred William the Silent, tried to break the siege, but his army, ravaged by dysentery and starvation, faltered. He died months later, a commander outlived by his own cause. On June 5, 1625, Breda fell. Spinola entered with solemn pomp, salutes echoing through the ruins. No slaughter this time, just exhaustion. Even the victors wept. Spanish trumpets blared triumph while the Dutch garrison marched out, weapons reversed, banners folded. The painter Velázquez would later immortalize the scene in The Surrender of Breda, a tableau of chivalry masking the horror. To Spain, it was proof the empire still breathed. To the Dutch, it was a dagger of pride. But rebellion is a fire that feeds on failure. Frederick Henry, Maurice's half-brother, stepped into the breach. Colder, sharper, more patient. He turned the Netherlands into a fortress of water and willpower. Dikes were cut to drown invaders. Windmills became engines of war, pumping floodwaters to starve Spanish armies. By 1622, at Bergen op Zoom, the tide already began to turn. 4,000 Spaniards fell trying to storm Dutch lines. The defenders lost barely 500. The North held. Spain could take towns, but not hearts. And while the empire bled itself dry on muddy fields, the Dutch were about to open a new front, one not of soil but of sea and smoke, where wooden hulls and roaring cannon would decide the fate of nations.
Part 2. Land of Floods and Forts. Dutch Counterstrikes, 1625 to 1638. When Frederick Henry of Orange took command, the rebellion evolved from survival to science. Where his brother Maurice fought like a swordsman, Frederick fought like an engineer. To him, war was a geometry of mud, water, and patience. Spain still swaggered with its tercios and its gold, but behind the bravado, the empire was cracking. The 30 Years' War raged across Central Europe, draining Madrid's coffers and scattering its finest troops. The Habsburgs fought Protestants from Bohemia to the Baltic, while the Dutch quietly sharpened their knives. By the late 1620s, the tide was turning, and the Dutch smelled blood. France, under the Cardinal Kingmaker Richelieu, began secretly bankrolling the rebels, not out of piety, but pragmatism. The French feared Habsburg encirclement more than heresy.
Meanwhile, Sweden's Gustavus Adolphus, the Lion of the North, exported his battlefield blueprints, mobility, discipline, and firepower to anyone who could pay. The Netherlands became a laboratory of modern war. In 1629, Spain celebrated a rare victory at S-Hertogenbosch, or Den Bosch, a Catholic stronghold deep in Protestant lands. They'd taken it with a breathtaking underground assault, detonating mines beneath the walls. But Frederick Henry learned fast. 3 years later, in 1632, he surrounded Den Bosch with an army of 30,000 and unleashed his true weapon: water. His engineers carved canals, built dikes, and flooded the lowlands until Spanish trenches turned to swamps. Heavy cannon were ferried on barges, powder stayed dry in floating redoubts. When the city fell, it wasn't to storming ladders, but to hydraulic warfare. The Dutch had weaponized their own landscape. Den Bosch's fall sent shockwaves through Europe. It was called the Gibraltar of the North, impregnable for half a century, no longer. Frederick pressed on. Maastricht, 1632, fell after brutal bombardment. Breda, 1637, was retaken, a symbolic reversal of Spinola's proud triumph 12 years earlier. By 1638, fortress after fortress, Saas van Gent, Roermond, Venlo, surrendered to this cold, methodical Orange Prince who preferred shovels to sabers. His motto could have been etched into the Dutch heart: reason over passion. Meanwhile, Spain was bleeding out. Bankrupt again by 1635, its soldiers unpaid, its ships rotting in port. From Peru to the Palatinate, its empire was stretched like a drumskin about to tear. And the Dutch made sure to pluck every string. Their privateers, descendants of the sea beggars who once raided with fishing boats, now sailed under official letters of marque, turning piracy into state policy. Between 1621 and 1648, they captured or sank more than 1,500 Spanish vessels, choking imperial commerce. The VOC, Dutch East India Company, and its Atlantic twin, the WIC, turned profit into firepower. Their fluid ships, cheap to build, fast to sail, and deadly when armed, became floating fortresses of capitalism. Each vessel carried not only cargo, but cannons and cause. Still, all of this, the sieges, the trade wars, the continental alliances, rested on one truth: he who ruled the seas would rule survival. And that was about to be tested. Because while Frederick Henry fortified the land, a new breed of Dutch admiral was rising, men who would meet Spain not in the fields of Brabant, but amid salt, storm, and gunpowder. The rebellion was about to set sail.
Part 2. Land of Floods and Forts. Dutch Counterstrikes, 1625 to 1638. When Frederick Henry of Orange took command, the rebellion evolved from survival to science. Where his brother Maurice fought like a swordsman, Frederick fought like an engineer. To him, war was a geometry of mud, water, and patience. Spain still swaggered with its tercios and its gold, but behind the bravado, the empire was cracking. The 30 Years' War raged across Central Europe, draining Madrid's coffers and scattering its finest troops. The Habsburgs fought Protestants from Bohemia to the Baltic, while the Dutch,
quietly sharpened their knives. By the late 1620s, the tide was turning, and the Dutch smelled blood. France, under the Cardinal Kingmaker Richelieu, began secretly bankrolling the rebels, not out of piety, but pragmatism. The French feared Habsburg encirclement more than heresy. Meanwhile, Sweden's Gustavus Adolphus, the Lion of the North, exported his battlefield blueprints to anyone who could pay. The Netherlands became a laboratory of modern war. In 1629, Spain celebrated a rare victory at S-Hertogenbosch, or Den Bosch, a Catholic stronghold deep in Protestant lands. They'd taken it with a breathtaking underground assault, detonating mines beneath the walls. But Frederick Henry learned fast. 3 years later, in 1632, he surrounded Den Bosch with an army of 30,000 and unleashed his true weapon, water. His engineers carved canals, built dikes, and flooded the lowlands until Spanish trenches turned to swamps. Heavy cannon were ferried on barges. Powder stayed dry in floating redoubts. When the city fell, it wasn't to storming ladders, but to hydraulic warfare. The Dutch had weaponized their own landscape. Den Bosch's fall sent shockwaves through Europe. It was called the Gibraltar of the North, impregnable for half a century. No longer. Frederick Henry pressed on. Maastricht, 1632, fell after brutal bombardment. Breda, 1637, was retaken, a symbolic reversal of Spinola's proud triumph 12 years earlier. By 1638, fortress after fortress, Saas van Gent, Roermond, Venlo, surrendered to this cold, methodical Orange prince who preferred shovels to sabers. His motto could have been etched into the Dutch heart: reason over passion. Meanwhile, Spain was bleeding out. Bankrupt again by 1635, its soldiers unpaid, its ships rotting in port. From Peru to the Palatinate, its empire was stretched like a drumskin about to tear. And the Dutch made sure to pluck every string. Their privateers, descendants of the sea beggars who once raided with fishing boats, now sailed under official letters of marque, turning piracy into state policy. Between 1621 and 1648, they captured or sank more than 1,500 Spanish vessels, choking imperial commerce. The VOC and its Atlantic twin, the WIC, turned profit into firepower. Their flutes ships, cheap to build, fast to sail, and deadly when armed, became floating fortresses of capitalism. Each vessel carried not only cargo, but cannons and cause. Still, all of this, the sieges, the trade wars, the continental alliances, rested on one truth. He who ruled the seas would rule survival. And that was about to be tested. Because while Frederick Henry fortified the land, a new breed of Dutch admiral was rising. Men who would meet Spain not in the fields of Brabant, but amid salt, storm, and gunpowder. The rebellion was about to set sail.
Part 3. Lords of the Waves. Naval Reenactments of Defiance. The Dutch were born of water, cities carved from marsh and tide, their dikes holding back both sea and empire. It was only fitting that their rebellion found its truest expression upon the waves. No lumbering galleons for them. Their ships were lean, low-slung predators, broadside heavy, fast to heel, and merciless in a gale. By the 1630s, the sea was no longer Spain's domain. It was the Republic's battlefield, bank, and baptism. Let's reenact two defining storms of fire and salt, the moments when Dutch seamanship broke the Spanish grip for good. Reenactment 1. The Raid on Gibraltar, April 25, 1607. The blueprint of defiance. It begins at dawn, under a pale Mediterranean sun. The Rock of Gibraltar looms, a Spanish fortress carved from legend, the gateway to the inland sea. Anchored below it, 21 Spanish galleys, their oars like dragonfly wings resting on calm water. From the horizon, 17 Dutch warships emerge, commanded by Jacob von Heemskerk aboard the Hollandia. They move like wolves through mist, sails trimmed, guns run out. No drumbeats, no trumpet calls, just the whisper of rigging in the wind. Then, thunder. The Hollandia's broadside erupts, 42-pound shot splintering galley hulls into geysers of wood and blood. Rowers scream, oars twist like broken ribs. Grape shot scythes through decks, Spanish officers vanish in pink mist. And then the finale. The terror that would haunt Spanish sailors for generations. Fire ships. Abandoned hulks, packed with pitch and powder, set alight and steered into the harbor. Fuses hissing, flames leaping skyward. The first explodes beneath the Nuestra Señora del Rosario. Others follow, chain detonations turning the bay into a boiling crucible. By noon, 11 galleys are gone, burned, shattered, or sunk. Heemskerk himself dies when a cannonball tears through his leg, but his victory lives on. The Dutch depart, leaving behind a harbor of corpses and cinders. Spain had lost a third of its Mediterranean squadron that morning, and more than ships. They lost their aura of invincibility. The tactics born here, speed, precision, fire, would define Dutch naval warfare for decades to come. Reenactment 2. The Battle of the Downs, October 21, 1639. The Armada's last gasp. Fast forward 30 years. The English Channel churns under gray autumn skies off Dover's coast. A Spanish fleet, 77 ships under Don Antonio Kendo, rides at anchor in the Downs, flying the Cross of Burgundy. On board, 5,000 troops wait to invade the Dutch coast and resurrect Spain's fading empire. But from the north, Maarten Tromp approaches. 45 Dutch ships slicing through the swell like scythes. Tromp, the one-eyed fisherman's son turned admiral, raises his flag aboard the Breda road. His signal flutters in the wind. Board and burn. The fog lifts and hell breaks loose. Dutch fire ships drift forward, sails ablaze, black smoke pouring across the water. The Spanish line fractures. The Santiago detonates. An explosion so vast it sends flaming timbers 100 feet into the air. Tromp drives the Breda road alongside Oquendo's Santa Ana. Grappling hooks fly, muskets crackle from the topsails, cutlasses flash, and boarding pikes jab through smoke and screams. By dusk,
The sea is a cauldron of wrecks. 20 Spanish ships burn or sink, thousands drown or surrender. Oquendo flees in a small boat, his once mighty armada shattered. Tromp sails home towing captured vessels, his decks slick with blood and silver alike. The Downs marked the end of Spanish naval power. Never again would an armada challenge the northern seas. The Dutch Republic, forged in tide and flame, was now master of the waves. These sea wolves didn't just win battles, they won an economy. Dutch shipyards churned out 1,000 vessels a year. Privateers returned with holds full of sugar, indigo, and enslaved labor, fueling a war machine powered by commerce. The Republic's navy was both sword and stock exchange. The ocean, once Spain's empire, now answered to Amsterdam.
Part 4. Exhaustion and Diplomacy. The Road to Münster, 1640 to 1648. By 1640, Spain was cracking like old oak under too many blows. The empire that once ruled from Manila to Mexico bled from every vein. Portugal revolted. Catalonia burned in open rebellion. France, long circling like a wolf, slashed across the Pyrenees. The Habsburg colossus staggered, its flanks aflame. The Dutch smelled weakness. Frederick Henry, the tireless architect of victory, struck one last time, seizing Hulst in 1640, the final Spanish toehold in Zeus Flandern. The North was secure, yet victory came hollow. 80 years of war had drained both sides. Harvests rotted, towns lay in ruin, famine and plague swept through provinces. More than 100,000 dead and countless displaced were the silent witnesses to a rebellion that had outlived its founders. So came the diplomats. In 1641, envoys gathered in the Westphalian city of Münster, a neutral ground where time itself seemed to creak under ceremony. The Dutch delegation, black velvet merchants with ledgers as sharp as sabers, faced Spanish grandees shimmering in gold and lace. They met beneath frescoed ceilings, maps unfurled on tables still scarred by candle burns and ink spills. Every line of a river, a battlefield reborn in miniature. The arguments were old but deadly. Spain offered peace without independence. The Dutch demanded sovereignty, free trade, and control of the Scheldt estuary, Antwerp's lifeline, deliberately strangled to starve the South's commerce. For years, words replaced cannon fire, but they cut just as deep. The Dutch would not bend. Spain could no longer fight. The war that began with the king's decree now crawled toward a merchant's compromise. Then, in 1647, Frederick Henry died, his life's work incomplete. His son, William II, took command, young and ambitious, but the States General, weary and pragmatic, seized the reins. They wanted peace more than glory. On January 30th, 1648, ink replaced blood. The Treaty of Münster was signed. Spain formally recognized the United Provinces as a free and independent state. The Dutch kept their hard-won borders, gained free navigation of the seas,
and locked down the Scheldt to preserve their maritime monopoly. No reparations, no surrender, just exhausted coexistence. It was folded into the Peace of Westphalia, the treaty that ended both the 30 Years' War and the 80 Years' War, rewriting the map of Europe. North of the rivers, a Protestant republic rose in triumph. South of them, the Spanish Netherlands, modern Belgium, remained under Catholic rule, a divided heart that would never quite heal. When the news reached Amsterdam, bells rang for 3 days. Bonfires flared from Texel's shores to the Hague's canals. The war was over, finally. But even in celebration, the air hung heavy. The Republic was free, yes, but scarred, divided, and changed forever. Faith and floodplains had split a people in two. The price of liberty had been nothing less than identity itself.
Part 5. Legacy. From Revolt to Republic. The Treaty of Münster didn't just end a war, it birthed a phenomenon. Out of rebellion rose a republic, and out of ruin came a golden age. The Dutch Republic, 7 provinces carved from mud, faith, and fire, exploded into the 17th century as the world's first global superpower, built not on thrones, but on trade. From the shipyards of Amsterdam and Rotterdam flowed fleets of fluids, sleek cargo ships that circled the globe faster and cheaper than any rival. The VOC, the Dutch East India Company, became the first multinational corporation, minting coins, hiring armies, and ruling from Cape Town to Batavia. The WIC, its Atlantic sibling, ferried sugar, slaves, and silver across oceans. Gold might have filled Spain's coffers, but it was Dutch credit and capitalism that reshaped the world. At home, art and science bloomed. Rembrandt painted souls into light. Vermeer captured quiet perfection in Delft. Christian Huygens built clocks that tamed time itself, while Anton von Leeuwenhoek peered into the invisible world through his microscope, discovering life too small for any king to rule. And in Amsterdam's crowded streets, ideas flowed freer than anywhere in Europe, a haven for Jews, Huguenots, philosophers, and printers. Here, Spinoza questioned God, Descartes sharpened reason. The Republic became a refuge for thought itself. But freedom carried fractures. The land remained militarized and divided, a republic of merchants haunted by memories of siege. Orangists and Republicans bickered over power. Commerce clashed with conscience. By 1672, Rompjaar, the year of disaster, France, England, and Münster struck, and the dream nearly drowned. But even then, the Dutch fought back, flooding their fields rather than surrender their freedom. They'd learned the lesson of their revolt. Survival was an art form. And what of Spain? Its invincible empire shattered, not by superior swords, but by ledgers, liberty, and long memory. The Dutch didn't just outfight an empire, they outlasted it. A warning etched in water and blood.
arrogance breaks before persistence. So, history rebels. What do you think? Was Admiral Maarten Tromp a pirate king or a patriot? Did Munster seal freedom forever, or just pause the struggle for it? Drop your thoughts in the comments, boost that like button, and subscribe for more revolutions that reshaped the world. Until next time, keep your dights high, your broadsides ready, and your freedom fiercely afloat.